My advice is that he needs to generalize this and talk about what would happen, for example, if the government could look at all the tax returns of everyone they didn't like, a political enemies list.
Right.
So Republicans get mad, they look at all the Democrats' tax returns. Democrats get mad, they look at Republicans. Or what if we had special prosecutors for everybody? And so we don't know that there's a crime you committed, but we say, what we do is we have a person, or we're going to look for wrongdoing. That look is an injustice. And it's important that people realize and remember that there's a burden on the government to prove guilt. And that's a tough burden. We do it intentionally because we want to give any kind of degree of doubt to the individual. We want to make the government have a bigger burden. Their burden is to prove guilt.
Right.
And one way Mueller really screwed up in this report is Mueller failed in the one sense of understanding that the burden of guilt comes to the government, because he says at one point, but we cannot exonerate the president. I think he actually uses those words.
Right.
Well, that's not his business, and it's not the business of government to exonerate. The business of government is to overcome a hurdle, and this is burden of proof to prove someone's guilt. Because if we had to prove everyone innocent, it's like, I'm pretty sure Stephen didn't do that, and we're not going to indict you, but I can't absolutely say that Stephen's completely innocent of all crime.
Right.
The innuendo of that and the government's full force and power, it's a terrible power. We have to be very careful. And I'm sad I won't ever vote for a special prosecutor because I don't think it's the right justice. We have grand juries, we have normal prosecutors, but we don't need special prosecutors that go through everybody's life from the beginning of time.
That's a very good point, and that leads to the innuendo of Donald Trump angrily tweeting or saying, I didn't do anything, and I'm saying, hold on a second, is that obstruction? Right? It leads to that. So, hold on a second, if there's no crime, how can we now declare it to be obstruction? And it really does become a slippery slope. And I'm amazed at the media coverage of this.
Right. And I think you're exactly right. How can you obstruct something that wasn't a crime? And actually, no one's actually saying he did obstruct anything. There's nothing he actually did that stopped the wheels from turning. The Mueller investigation went forward, $35 million worth. I don't know whether there was actual obstruction. Did people talk about ways we can try to get the stupid Mueller investigation over? I think they did talk about that.
Right.
But there was no crime, and it turns out it was a false allegation. So if you're falsely accused of something and you try to get the charges dismissed and you work hard to make sure that whoever's trying to accuse you of false crimes doesn't succeed, are you obstructing justice? Or are you actually helping and abetting justice?
Or even it gets to the point, where Barr answered a question from, I think it was Kamala Harris. Yes, it was Kamala Harris. And she asked a question. She said, has the president, I want to make sure I get this correct, has the president or anyone else instructed you to investigate anybody? And they're trying to act as though that's an own. I'm going, wait, and Barr said, I'm grappling with the word anyone else. It's like asking, hold on, have you, Senator Rand Paul, or anyone else ever said anything bad about anyone? And then if you say, I don't think so, is that obstruction? It seems like they're going to more generalized questions. If you look at the hearing, it was no longer about legality. It was about if he's a nice guy or not.
Right. Well, I think they're getting at whether the president has asked them to investigate the investigators, the ones who came up with this fake dossier, should they? And I think they should, because I think it's very important that we had the head of the CIA, John Brennan, who swore under testimony that he never saw this dossier till January. Well, he had a task force for 6 months looking into this and had members of the FBI on his team. You think he never saw one of those letters from Christopher Steele? I think he's parsing words, and this is the kind of stuff that they'll do to you. The dossier wasn't a dossier until they put all the letters together. Right. Before that, there was 20 individual letters. So I think he read the letters, and then when they were put together in a folder and called it a dossier, he said, well, I have not seen the dossier.
Obstruction!
But really, so much of this originated in government. Government took a dossier that no one would believe, and to get people to believe it, they gave it to people like John McCain, who then gave it back to the government. The FBI's like, well, John McCain gave us this dossier. Well, we already had it, but he gave it back to us, and now we need to investigate because a senator has given us what we already had that we gave to him to begin with.
Well, look what we found in Senator Rand Paul's recycling bin. You put it there. Let's not get into details here. Let me ask you this, because you've obviously been a critic of President Trump in the past, and I think you've supported, I think you've been very fair. What is it like? You said you played golf with him. Is it tense at all? Do you have a good working relationship together?
We get along pretty well. We both love the game of golf, which helps. He's very competitive, and so we have a good competitive round usually when we play. And really, it doesn't get overly serious. But I can tell you through the round, and being around him a long time and hearing his statements, that I'm very encouraged by some of his sentiments and his instincts. And I'll give you an example. In the State of the Union, he said that great nations don't fight perpetual wars. I couldn't agree more. None of the Bushes would have ever said that. None of the establishment Republicans would have ever said that. It takes somebody who hasn't been muddled and drugged down by all of the establishment neoconservative rhetoric to say something like that, but it's exactly what I believe.
Right.
That nations don't fight perpetual war, and in private and in public, when I talk to him, he says that he wants to be the president that gets, that ends some of these wars. In Afghanistan, we're spending $50 billion a year. There's not a general left at the Pentagon who actually believes that there's a military solution in Afghanistan. So I don't want to send the last kid or send one of my family members over there to fight in a war where every general is saying there's no military solution.
Something happened to me a while back, and ever since then I just can't bring myself to sleep on a regular bed. It was a traumatizing and emotionally scarring event. The kind that you'll never forget. But before I get into it, I have to talk about space. I don't mean the space up there, stars and galaxies and whatnot. I mean actual physical space. More specifically, the space in your own home. If you're like me and have lived most of your life for a good enough number of years in the exact same house, you might know what I'm talking about. For example, as a kid, I used to go around my house and attempt doing all sorts of things with my eyes closed. Making toast, turning the TV on, and finding my favorite channels. Starting on my PlayStation. Dressing and undressing. I think you get the idea. Every now and then, even as an adult, I would try to do the same things as well. And I'm sure that some of you can relate to what I'm saying here. What I'm trying to say is that if you live long enough in a certain place, you're bound to get this nearly perfect notion of where your things are and how much space they're taking. Just as you know where you have free space. It's the kind of thing that you just know. I was attending university at the time, and I was living in the same apartment I had lived my whole life up until that point. My parents, who had retired by then, were kind enough to let me keep it, and they decided to move up to their holiday house in Vermont. I lived alone, and I seldom had people over, and I never had any maid of any kind come in to do some chores. I'm the only one who ever really interacted with the place, so I definitely knew perfectly well every little thing about it, where I kept all my stuff and whatnot. On the night everything went wrong, I remember sensing that something was off as soon as I opened the door to my home. I caught a whiff of something strange in the air, which dissipated almost instantly. I knew what the interior of my own home usually smelled like, but that strange odor was something that I simply couldn't place or identify. Maybe a gust of wind had carried the scent of something the neighbors from next door were cooking, perhaps. I chalked it up to being something along those lines, but that wasn't the end of it. I was pretty much restless for the rest of the evening. I just felt so weird and uneasy. All the more so for not knowing why I was feeling like that. Subconsciously, I could tell that something was wrong, but the realization would only come at a later time. I couldn't shake off the notion that I wasn't feeling safe, not at all in my own home on that particular night, which is something that had never happened to me before. I ended up doing something that I also used to do all the time when I was a kid when I was left alone for long periods of time. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and I went from room to room to make sure that there weren't any uninvited guests to be found. Obviously, there's no way that my younger self would have ever been able to do anything, if he were to actually come face to face with an intruder. Deep down, I allowed myself to grab a knife and play brave because I kinda knew it was mostly my imagination, and that there weren't any monsters or robbers waiting for me in the dark. But as an adult, the reality of being assaulted in your own home is on a whole other level. You no longer have your childlike imagination to blame your fears. You live in the real world where bad things happen all the time, which includes people somehow managing to break into your home for who knows what purpose. You can never be too careful, and fear helps you keep everything in check. And so, just like the good old times, I grabbed a knife which gave me the illusion of being safer, braver and stronger than I am in reality, and I checked all the rooms in my apartment. To no one's surprise, I found absolutely nothing, but then again, I wasn't exactly expecting to find anything out of the ordinary, I guess. I managed to relax for the rest of the evening, and eventually I went to bed. But I didn't fall asleep right away like I used to. Something was keeping me awake, but I still didn't know what it was. As I was lying in bed, I found myself rattled by the very absence of sound in my home. This wouldn't have been an issue at all on any other day, but this time it was different. No, something was different. Something about my apartment had changed while I was out. I was sure of it, and yet this was the kind of certainty that I just couldn't explain. I knew it, but I didn't know why or how I knew it. I couldn't think of anything else as I tried to figure it out, but nothing made sense to me. I mean, I had gone around the house armed with a knife, as I looked for intruders of any kind, but I didn't come across anything suspicious. And that's when it hit me. A realization so sudden and terrifying that I could almost feel its crushing weight pressing down on me. Yes, I had walked around my home and checked all the rooms, but I hadn't quite checked every single nook and cranny. I had missed one specific, obvious spot. Well, it's not so much that I missed it, but it's one of those things that you tend to think about a lot more as a kid. As an adult, you just tend to worry about more realistic things, such as windows and doors being properly locked. What I'm trying to say is that I had pretty much verified that my whole place was safe, except for the space under my bed. As soon as I realized this, I started thinking about space all over again. More specifically, the space under my bed. The space between the floor and the mattress. I started thinking about all that space, and how someone could easily fit in there. Right under me. And that was it. As soon as I thought about it, I knew that's what it was. I knew what was wrong. There was, without a doubt, someone under my bed. As soon as this thought turned into a cold hard fact in my mind, that's when I first noticed it. A sound so faint, a sound so nearly not there that it might have not been there at all. This wheezing of sorts, the sound of something breathing in and out, but trying to keep it as silent as possible. I could barely hear it, thanks to how hard and fast my heart was beating, but I knew that it was there. Just as my body knew all along, from the moment it stepped inside the apartment, that something was different. Whether it was something or someone, it was undeniable. A certain amount of mass had somehow found its way in, and it was now occupying an undetermined amount of space under my bed. Under me. I was barely able to process all of this as I tried to keep my cool, while trying not to alert whoever was under me that they had been found out. But it was easier said than done. I was sweating buckets and lightly shaking under the covers, and if anything, I thought it was only a matter of time until the sound and vibration of my own heartbeat gave me away. And then everything stopped, as my mind drew a blank and my heart skipped a beat, when I felt something slightly poking the mattress right under me. I would have gasped if I could, but I swear it felt like my heart had actually lodged itself inside my throat. I was petrified. Was it a finger? Was it a knife? Was I going to get stabbed at any given second without notice? Was something actually going to just pierce straight through me? Would it get my lung, my liver, my heart, my spine? I was on the verge of losing my mind, and when I started sensing multiple of these unseen fingers pushing against the mattress and softly drawing circles and lines on it, that's when I knew that something was definitely very wrong. I felt like I couldn't just get up and leave, because any sudden movement like me rapidly jumping out of bed might tip them off in some way. So instead, I pretended to shuffle under the covers as if I had been rolling in my sleep, and I grabbed my phone from my nightstand, which was fortunately on silent mode. I scheduled an alarm to ring 30 seconds later, to try and pass it off as a call. I would get up, pretend to answer my phone, and use that as an excuse to get the hell out of my apartment. I put my phone back without making a sound, and I waited. As soon as it rang, I grabbed it as I literally leapt from my bed towards my bedroom door. "Oh, hey man, what's up?" I said, pretending to answer my phone. When I reached the door, I switched the lights on almost instinctively, and what I saw made me drop my phone. There was an arm rapidly reaching out from under my bed, but this was no regular arm. It was extremely thin with barely any skin plastered over its bones. It was also very long and disjointed. Very disjointed. An arm with 7 elbows comes to mind, but its strange shape kind of made it look more like an arm that had been broken in 7 different places. I only saw it for a split second or so, but it was more than enough. And I'll never forget how it just seemed to unfurl from under the bed, as it bent itself in so many different and strange ways, as whatever it was attached to was crawling out from under there. I ran out of the apartment, slamming the door shut behind me just as something crashed into it. Needless to say, I didn't wait for the elevator. I just went straight for the stairs and jumped so many flights that I feared I would break my ankles at some point. I was so out of it that by the time I had reached the ground floor, I just kept on running, which resulted in me going through a pretty solid pane of glass, which made up most of the main entrance door that leads into the building. When I came to, I had paramedics all over me, as well as nosy neighbors trying to figure out what my deal was. I only noticed the cops a little while afterwards, as they waited for the medics to clear me so they could ask me what the hell had happened. I can't quite remember what I said or how I said it, but I think they probably got the gist of it since they quickly went up to my apartment with the landlord leading the way. They came back down about 10 minutes later, and they said that they hadn't found anything. They then proceeded to lock the place down to conduct a more careful sweep of the building, including checking in with every other resident on every other floor. But they still came up empty some hours later. I didn't really understand how that could be the case, but if I had really seen what I think I saw, I had to accept that I could have just hoped for a logical explanation. The cops and paramedics eventually left, having determined that I was okay enough and that my lacerations weren't that big of a deal. But I never went back up. I never entered that apartment ever again. On that night, I stayed over at a friend's place, and some days later, he and another buddy of mine helped me move all my things out of the apartment. the apartment that I had lived in all my life up until then. When I say that they helped me, I'm saying they did pretty much all the heavy lifting considering I wasn't even there. I just couldn't bring myself to ever come near that place again. They were cool about it, but I could tell that they resented me a little bit for it, considering that they lost an enormous amount of time with the entire ordeal. As I said, I never went back there. Never once did I step another foot into my apartment after I ran away from whatever that thing was. And that's why I no longer sleep on a bed. That's why I no longer sleep on a mattress. I just tend to sleep on the floor, most of the time because the trauma was that bad. But that's not all. If you think that I could easily just get myself one of those low beds, the kind where someone can possibly fit under, or if you think for a moment that you're safe in your own room, just because nothing could possibly fit underneath your bed, well, allow me to tell you just how wrong you are. It doesn't matter the kind of bed that I use. It doesn't matter the kind of bed that you use. No matter how you sleep, or what you sleep on, there will always be space. You understand? Whether it's the space between the floor and your bed, the space that separates the mattress and your body, the space between the fabric of your t-shirt and your very skin, there will always be some space. There will always be room for that thing to find its way in. I should know, because no matter where I sleep or what I sleep on, I always wake up with the sensation of fingers running across my back. I hope her mind is free or at peace. My name is Clark. I am one of 3 people who can truthfully say that they have time traveled. It is not what you think it's like. I'm not really certain how they selected us. I was working on my bachelor's degree at my state university when I was approached by the team. Project BTA OW33 is what they called it. No cool name like Project X, or Project Alpha Time Warp, or something along those lines. Just BTA OW33, whatever that means. They approached me and asked if I would like to take part in an experiment in exchange for my tuition being paid for. I only had a year left of school, but those 2 semesters were going to cost me $32,000. So of course I said yes. When I asked what the experiment was, they told me that it was extremely secretive. I would be finding out details the day of, and then I could decide to back out if I didn't want to participate. About 6 weeks went by and I was basically on call to be ready to go whenever they needed me. Finally, I got the call. I live in Atlanta and the team had the 3 of us meet up in a parking deck about 20 minutes outside of the city. Once we were there, we all got in one of those short school buses, and they took us out to the northern Georgia mountains. It was about a 2-hour drive and we didn't really get much time to get to know each other. We were under strict rules not to reveal information about ourselves or talk to each other on the bus ride over. The last couple of miles were on a rocky dirt road leading down a mountain. The bus parked in a small, maybe half-acre stretch of grass. The grass was freshly mowed, and I could tell by sight and smell. The alcove of grass was enclosed by large trees from the surrounding forest. "All right," A man stood up from his seat at the front of the bus. "We're here. I'll brief you all once we get inside the house." As we got off the bus one by one, we could see that in the center of the clearing was a building. It had one very large window on one side, basically encompassing that entire wall. Every other wall was black on the outside, and I could see through the window that the inside was painted white. There was a large silver metal ring that surrounded the house. It came about 3 inches off the freshly mowed grass. It was a foot wide, and it had lights coming from drilled holes all the way around it. "Watch your step and please do not step on top of this ring," the same man said. "Once we get inside, just go ahead and take a seat." We all stepped over the ring and made our way into the house. The house, as the man had called it, was made up of only one room. Inside, there were 4 chairs around a rather large circular table. The chairs, table, walls, and the one lamp were all white. The only thing that wasn't white in the room were the pair of bookshelves against each wall, both empty. After we all took our seats, the man introduced himself. "Alrighty, welcome. My name is Dr. Olson. I'm glad you've all decided to take part in this, to take part in history. As we told you all, this is extremely sensitive information. After my explanation of what this experiment consists of, I'll ask you if you want to continue. Understand?" "What if we don't want to continue?" a woman said, about my age with fiery red hair. "And then we know this super secret information, right? And you're just going to let us walk out of here?" The man gave a smile. He knew that this would be asked. "Yes, you are free to leave here knowing what the experiment consists of. However, the university and I are confident of 3 things. 1, you won't want to leave. 2, the university's attorneys are rather powerful, and you already signed the NDAs. And 3, no one will believe you if you tell them." Silence filled the room. The redhead slouched back in her chair, a nonverbal, "Well, go on then." "The experiment," Dr. Olson continued, "is time travel." I smiled, but I wasn't sure why. The others seemed to snort a little bit in amusement. The tensions in the room seemed to release. Now, I know it sounds, crazy. I've heard it all before. I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to just sit in this room, observe, and tell me what happens." We all nodded in agreement. A couple of okays filled the air. The doctor carried on. "All right, this is how it'll work. I'm going to drive up to the control center. It's about 5 minutes up the mountain. I have a couple of colleagues up there as well. From there, I will flip the switch in layman's terms." When Dr. Olson began his next sentence, he leaned forward and his face took on a very stern, angry father quality. "Do not leave this room. After I walk out, do not leave. Do not leave until I come back down the mountain. Walk back inside this room and tell you that you can leave. I have done this experiment before, but not on humans. I know that it works. I know that it's safe. I can promise you, this is safe. I cannot promise you your safety, though, if you leave the house." I remember the air shifting to an uneasy feel. "Are you sure that this is safe? What did you test it on? What's it gonna feel like?" A scrawny blonde guy said, who couldn't have been older than 21. The doctor continued, "I know that it's safe. No animal that I've used has been affected by this. I've used rats and I progressed up to dogs. No bruises, no cuts, no change in behavior. And to be honest with all of you, I don't know what you should expect. I'm not sure if it feels like a tingle, a sting, a pinch, or anything else. This is the very first human trial, which is why you need to pay attention to any sensation that you feel. Wait, okay. If we are actually about to time travel, where or when are we traveling to? I asked. You will be launching 3 hours into the future. Once activated at the control site, this building will disappear. My team and I will be on standby for 3 hours and then, poof, the house is back with all of you in it. 3 hours into the future. A long silence followed. I'm skeptic of just about anything, but something about Dr. Olson's tone, his body language, the way that he was explaining it, it was hard for me to doubt. He was dead serious. When it was clear that there were no more questions, Dr. Olson looked at his watch and stood up, and then he cleared his throat. Alrighty then. It's 1:22 p.m. right now, so by the time I make it to the control site, it should be just before 1:30. The warm-up only takes about 2 minutes, so we'll mark your projected arrival time at 4:30. Are there any questions or concerns? No one spoke. Okay. I'll see you all in 3 hours. Or from your perspective, just a couple of minutes. The doctor winked, nodded, and closed the door behind him after adding, Safe travels. The three of us stood from our chairs as we watched the doctor drive off. And then we all turned to one another, the tension yet again easing. Well, he sure knows how to make an entrance and an exit, the redhead said. No kidding, the blonde kid answered. Well, nice to meet you, fellow time travelers. We all chuckled a bit, and that nervous sort of laughter. My name's Ryan. I'm Clark. I replied back with a handshake to follow. Emma, she said with a smile that could make any man or woman's head turn. We exchanged pleasantries and talked about our schooling and how we were selected. Emma was the first to ask what we were all thinking. So, what's the chance of this being legit? Don't get me wrong, I would love to be the world's first time traveler. But I feel like this is just going to end in a dud. Or maybe we're just getting pranked. Yeah, Ryan replied. When he was explaining everything, I thought that it may be a prank. Like this may be an actual experiment from the university, but it's an experiment to see if they can convince people that they time traveled. That's meta, I quipped. Oh guys, look. Emma started staring out of the large window. The ring that surrounded the building was slowly getting brighter. It looked like 100 laser pointers slowly brightening, shining up into the overcast sky. Does this mean that we're in the 2-minute warm-up? I said, already knowing the answer. I guess so, Emma started. God, my heart is racing. Mine too. Same. We all stood perfectly still, watching those skinny beams of light growing brighter until it was nearly blinding. I turned to look at Emma. Her pupils were closing to the size of a pencil tip, maybe smaller. Her gaze along with Ryan's was locked on the beams. I could see their faces getting more illuminated each second that passed. Second after second, it just kept getting brighter. Brighter and brighter and brighter until it was like we were being engulfed by the sun. And in less than a second, it was dark. I chose my words carefully. Less than a second. I read once that in antiquity, people were advised to avoid the forests and the wilds. These territories are treacherous and often unexplored or unmarked. Those who would enter would not always return, and so myths began to spread that terrible things lurked within these lands. Most people were content with letting the untamed lands remain so. But as time went on though, most of the world moved on to fearing other things. I, however, have come to fear the woods much like our ancestors did. My family moved to the small wooded town of Sunderland, Vermont when I was 8. My parents wanted someplace quiet and not so crowded, something in contrast to a place like Boston. I didn't particularly want to move, but I hated Boston anyway, so I didn't argue. The place my parents had bought was a rustic 2-story with a backyard that rested against the western edge of the forest. For the first 7 years that I lived in Sunderland, things were normal. The woods and I had a healthy relationship. I would hang out within viewing range of the house and I would never go in after dark. That changed when I was a junior in high school. And that's when my nightmare began. It was a late summer afternoon and the sky was a dull gray. My friend Chris and I went back into the woods behind my house. We were going to smoke a joint that he had bought off a kid in our calculus class for $30. It was a fatty, but Chris had definitely gotten ripped off. We don't need to go far. I just don't want my parents to be able to see us, I told Chris. You've never explored deeper than this? He asked. A couple times with my mom and dad, but I've never really been interested otherwise. And then it's time for you to go on an adventure, he said. And I've got the perfect solution to your fear of getting lost. Chris stopped and he dropped his backpack to his feet. He rummaged around for a moment and then he pulled out a can of red spray paint. We can make a ring on the trees we pass so we don't get lost. Why are you even carrying that around? I asked. Hey, you never know when you might want to mark your territory. You're an idiot, dude. I laughed. We continued walking deeper into the forest, Chris marking the way. I let him walk ahead of me as we walked further on ground made soft by years of decay. After a few minutes, he slowed down abruptly before hurrying over to something and saying, Hey, come take a look at this. What's up? I asked as I approached the side. Check this hole out. Just a few feet in front of Chris was a pit. It was probably 3 to 4 meters in diameter. It looked like somebody had used a giant postal digger to lift a perfect cylinder out of the forest floor. Rope-like vines hung around the edges, but the walls of the holes were strangely smooth. How deep do you think it is? I heard Chris light the joint. Good enough spot for me. He mumbled to himself. No idea, let's throw some stuff in it. I kicked a rock in and I waited to hear it collide with something, but there was only silence. Chris threw in a couple branches as I stood close to the edge, watching them fall into the black. Silence again. Freaky. And Chris exhaled smoke and passed me the joint. Thanks, I said as I took a deep hit and I peered into the pit. It was almost mesmerizing. Though the longer I stared, the more nervous I felt. I felt as if something behind the darkness was staring back at me. I took another hit and I passed the joint back. I don't like this hole, I said. My head hurts looking into it. We continued to hand the joint back and forth as we stared into the pit. What do you think's down there? Chris asked. Probably just dirt and a lot of bugs. I hate bugs. Chris kicked a bunch of dirt into the hole. I don't know, man, they can be kinda cool, except for spiders. Yeah, screw spiders. Also, screw this pit. Let's go home, Chris said as he tossed the still smoking roach into the pit. We watched the light get swallowed by the darkness that filled the hole. Man, that's deep, I whispered before I turned to follow Chris, who was already walking back. As we made our way back to my house, I felt like I had seen or done something that I wasn't meant to. I revisited the site in my nightmares that evening. In my dream, I was staring up at myself and Chris from within the pit. When Chris had tossed the roach into the pit, I watched it fall in slow motion for what seemed like an eternity. When the embered tip finally went out, there was an inhuman cry that carved into my eardrums like a hot owl. My vision cannonballed outside of the pit, and it swerved through the trees in the forest until it just stopped outside of my bedroom window, where I saw myself sleeping. I immediately woke up and I looked out of my bedroom window, my eyes searching wildly for something new or out of place. But there was nothing there. I sat there hyperventilating for several seconds before I started to calm down. The next day at school, I hurried over to Chris during our shared free period in the back of the library. "Hey man, how's it going?" He didn't respond. "Yo, you good?" I put my hand on his shoulder and he jolted upright. "Shit, you scared the hell out of me," he said sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry, I was taking a nap. I didn't get much sleep last night." Did he have the same dream? I thought to myself, but I didn't ask. I just wanted it to be a weird nightmare. I sat down across from him at the table and I pulled my laptop out. "So what's good?" I asked. "Not much, but listen to this. After I went home last night, I couldn't stop thinking about that hole. It was weird, right?" Chris answered. "Yeah, very," I replied. So I decided to do some Googling about really deep pits, and I came across this thing called Mel's Hole. Some guy called this paranormal talk radio show in the 90s, and he talked about how he had found this hole that was so deep that even an 80,000-foot fishing line didn't reach the bottom. The thing might be a hoax, but regardless, it got me thinking. How does a hole like the one that we found even exist? No idea, but there's something not right about it. And on a side note, can we stop calling it the hole? It's kind of bothering me referring to it like that. How about Heather's hole? It's in your backyard after all. That's gross, I laughed. Something else. How about the circle? It was a perfect circle after all. And that's better. So should we go back and check it out later? Chris asked. Was he not afraid of that thing like I was? I don't know, Chris. The circle makes me really anxious. So what are we supposed to do, just forget about it? Chris said with a hint of frustration. I don't know what I want to do, but... Chris cut me off. You had a dream too, didn't you? I stared into his eyes and they twitched. Yeah, the falling roach and then something coming out of the circle, right? Yeah, I saw it too. I sat in silence for a moment. You want to go back after that? We had the same dream, man. That means something. Nothing's happened, and for all we know, we were just scared by it and had really similar dreams. Chris did have a point. But what if something does happen? Chris scratched his cheek. Well, we'll go from there then.